do we go from here? What is our role as a college? It's been suggested that our curriculum is a little bit irrelevant. Our panel members are President Oscar Anderson, Einar Johnson, Carl Chrislock, third, and Philip Quanbeck, and Ken Fagerlie.
I don't know why I have to get these other fellows off the hook by starting out, but I will try to just say a word at the end of what has been, I think, a very, very significant day at Augsburg. I think it's all and more that we hoped it to be. Some of us have been thinking about this for a long time. This whole matter of really taking time to listen. And I think we've had some splendid presentations today. I think we've been talked to directly and honestly and forthrightly, and I hope that we've heard what has been said. Now the question that the panel faces is this: where do we go from here? I would like to submit that it's too soon to say. I don't think we can say right at this point where we are going. I think we've heard too much to really be able to sort through everything. I know how we feel, and maybe that's what the last speaker said. We should just move ahead on the basis of how we feel about it. I'm sure all of us want to move ahead. I think we want to go someplace. But to sit here and say, now this is what's going to happen because of this one day in May, I think would be presumptuous. I know this, that we will have to wrestle with what we have heard today. We will have to wrestle with it in all humility. First of all, realizing that we're part of the problem, that we don't have the answers, but that we suspect there are some areas into which we will have to move, such as the area of our own curriculum. How to be sure that the people who leave this institution are really educated in terms of the whole man, in terms of what it means really to be human. I think it means that we turn also to the question of our own constituency as a student body, because I think we are deprived by virtue of the fact that we do not have the kind of racial mix that we ought to have at Augsburg. I think it means that we look also in the direction of action, further ways in which we can be involved. These are just some of the areas that we're going to have to wrestle with. Now, I'm not sure how we're going to go about wrestling with them. I'm not sure in my mind whether this is something that we wrestle with as a community constituted mostly of white people, or whether this is something that we can work out better with our black brothers. I'm groping. I don't know. I do know that what we will seek to do will have to be within the context of what we are, and that is a college. We're not an industry. We're not a social agency. We're not a segment of government. We are an educational institution, whether that's good or bad, but that's what we are. And what we do, we will have to do within the context of our own existence as one educational institution in this community, seeking to do what it can with this problem that has been so dramatically placed before us today.
How about you fellas responding? We will get them to respond, believe me. Let's invite questions from the audience. Yes.
I appreciate that, because I think that's exactly the mood of this college, that something is going to happen, and it's going to happen soon. I don't want to give the impression that it's going to be put off, but I didn't want to give the impression that we could stand up here tonight and say this and this and this is going to be done, because I think that would be presumptuous. I think very, very constructive things will be done, because it is raining, and we're going to get the umbrella up. There's no doubt about it, as far as I'm concerned.
I'd like to respond to this too. I think that I'm in a curricular area that's very much involved here. I think I can promise, partly as a result of the stimulus that we've gotten today, that History 21 and 22 will be taught somewhat differently than it has in the past. We have been... I don't exactly know how to interpret that. We have been, in the past few years, trying to give more emphasis to the role of the black man in American history, and we're certainly going to work harder along that line. And I think, too, in our department, that we'll examine other courses. I can say this as a member of the department, I'm not the chairman, to see if the emphasis is right, if it doesn't have to be reoriented. But that's one specific suggestion.
Would you like to respond?
I was going to ask, maybe you would want to answer. I was going to ask if the education department is going to really delve into what we can do to relate to the inner city schools.
Good.
The question has to do with the role of the education department.
Good. I wanted a chance to say a couple of things about it. I'll have to warn you, though, that next year I'll be landing in Paris in the midst of the riots if they keep on, and going on to Sweden, where we aren't too popular either. But the department will be here, and we have many things to be done. First, let me say that as a department, I think we have a very important role to play, and that part is in teacher education. And we should be and will be, I think, involved more with the city than we have been. This year, for instance, we are making arrangements for more student teachers to go to the Minneapolis schools than we have in any year since I've been here. And we think, and I am firmly convinced, that we have the kind of student that if they see the need, will rise to this. I think our obligation in part is to give exposure to the need. I would like to say also that with 50% of our people going into teacher education, this means that this is not only the responsibility of the education department. We tell accrediting agencies that this is a total college commitment. And I think it's true that educationists haven't been 100% successful in preparing teachers as far as their curriculum or the program is concerned. I think we're going to increasingly need to solicit the help of every department in preparing a curriculum which will be more useful, more beneficial, more pertinent to the situation. We are making some steps in this direction. I think there are some steps underfoot now for some efforts in cooperation, for for among colleges and the university. I feel that the university and the colleges are wide open to doing some things together, and I would hope we would put our own stamp upon this and our own influence upon this, and I think we can. By the way, one concrete thing that has come out of this, and one of your very fine speakers today, I asked him if he would be able to and would be willing to come to talk to one of our classes in School and Society, and I think this is the sort of thing we want to do. We want to know more specifically how we can prepare teachers more adequately for the situation for Minneapolis, because after all, here we are, the only college in Minneapolis, and we would like to be relevant to Minneapolis, and that means we're going to have, and we intend to, go to the community and to other disciplines in trying to develop a more relevant preparation for teachers. That's our little part of it in teacher education.
I'll recognize the lady over here. Yes.
Well, I teach one course in the education department. This probably isn't an answer to your question. I don't think I can answer your question entirely, but in the social studies methods class, we're having as a principal assignment the preparation of units to be fit into standard courses in the high school curriculum, and all of them involving minority history. We're encouraging the people who are members of the class to secure resource materials from wherever, from the resource centers here in Minneapolis. We're trying to get them to grips with the problem in that respect. And of course we expect in our social science courses to step up the emphasis in minority history and minority culture, apart from the professional education courses.
We've made steps already for next year to have the student teachers who will be going to Minneapolis to be in attendance in the same classes to which the Minneapolis teachers will be dealing in the area of minority history, and I already have a verbal agreement that from Minneapolis that they would be willing to take our students in such thing, and we would feel that people that are, at least for these people who are going into Minneapolis, that they would have this exposure in addition. We would say that this was a part of our teacher education program. We're making those very concrete steps. I have now as I say, a verbal agreement from Minneapolis that this will be so.
Lady over here, please. Would a new teacher qualify to teach in a deprived area?
Well, I think you have to remember that people like myself are groping in this, and we aren't as conversant with it as we should be. We'd have to admit our inadequacy. I don't think that teachers as a group, and including ours, who come from backgrounds that are different, would be adequately prepared. I don't suppose really ever. We're trying to make all possible efforts, no, I think that's an unfair statement. I don't think we've done nearly enough, but I think we should do more to expose them to what it means to be a teacher in the deprived areas. I think that this is one thing that needs to be more to be done. I think I would have to rely in large measure upon, again, what I feel among our students, a fine, dedicated people who as a group, who are willing and conscientious and dedicated. That probably isn't enough, and we can do much more. I think that you're probably aware that there are some cooperative arrangements now in effect under the latest educational act of Congress, which may do some things in this area. I hope.
What do you Augies think? You're always very forthright. I'd like to hear from you. I'll recognize a fellow over here. President Anderson will respond.
Some of the men at this town will know that a week or two ago I called a meeting of some of the faculty members, and I said, now, I think you should be very serious about answering this question. How can we be sure that no student leaves this institution without an adequate exposure to minority history? How can we be sure that nobody gets through this institution without facing the problems of racial bigotry and prejudice? And I think that it's up to the education department to see that no one leaves this institution to teach who hasn't had the exposure in these areas that we've talked about. Now, the things that Dr. Johnson has said, I think, are going to bear fruit in the area of education. I think that there are some things that can be done in the area of the religion courses that will deal specifically with this, and in the sociology courses. There are courses right now that maybe ought to be put into the general educational requirements and others removed in order to make some of these things possible. And I realize that this is a dangerous ground for an administrator to be on, because he's not supposed to tell the faculty what to teach or what the curriculum ought to be. But this was the question that I put, and I got some real good response. This is the kind of thing that is being grappled with right now.
I'll recognize the girl here and you over there next. All right?
The administration and maybe the faculty can introduce courses and maybe change their course. But what do you do about people who don't know what they're doing? What do you do about teachers who have no idea what it means to change? Who've all the time said, I have to teach this. This has to be included in sociology. So we don't have time for this. Or we can't give it enough time. Unfortunately, we don't have enough time. And at the same time, we'll sit there and teach you for the fourth time or the fifth time what you probably should have learned when you were in high school about the family of languages or something like this. How do you change people? Which is what the last speaker was talking about. How do we change students who are so coolly aloof? And I disagree with the man from the education department. I don't think Augsburg students are really dedicated, because we stand up there and look and we say, now I look at it objectively, but none of us will look at it emotionally.
Do you really think that's true? No.
Yes.
It occurs to me that we've talked, and that our last speaker, Mr. Williams, talked about institutions, systems, establishments, and individuals. And of course, I think that we have some romantic notions about what education can do with people. I think that that we have some ideas about what can be taught people and how they can be taught to respond that don't find much correspondence in reality. And so I'd like to kind of just turn around and pose the question in a different way. Now, most of you are students, and you're here no, I shouldn't say a maximum. One of my friends went to school for 17 years in college but let's say you're here ordinarily for 4 years, and sometimes for less. And what's important, I think, for you, really, is not simply what the institution does about minority history. It seems to me that from what we've heard today, what's important is the sort of attitude that you bring to those structures within which you live when you leave the place. Yeah, I don't think it's wrong. You talk about established prejudice. A prejudice is established by institutions and it's maintained by individuals. And I think that you and I are part of that. I think that the dictionary description this morning of red, white, yellow, and black was indicative of that subtle prejudice that fills our lives. And I think that we have to do with this institution, and we have to try to work with the institution and see that it doesn't perpetuate that. But I think that when you leave the institution and you're here for a relatively short time, that you have responsibilities which aren't simply institutionalized. I think you have to deal with it.
I have 3 suggestions. I think that in the Department of Sociology, that we should deal more with minority groups than we do in the present, and not just only deal with it in the open division class, in the open division course. We need an equal history course. I think that in English we should have a literature course that deals primarily with black novels. And I think the required English course should deal more with black novels. I think that in the bookstore we should have more books by black novels, maybe even a whole section devoted to black novels. And I think last but not least, we need more black professors.
Yes. Thank you. Let's see. Okay, I'll recognize you.
It seems to me we're skipping over point someplace back there. My question is, are we worried about the people who are here, people who feel concerned about the problem, people that may take a course in something like this, people that want to do something? Or are we worried about the people that may not gain the exposure that they need to make a decision, whichever way it goes, not setting up an educational course to make a person do a specific thing, but giving him the exposure that he needs for something that touches all of society? This is my question.
That's a pretty long question to repeat. Who would like to? Can't answer.
My name is Lejeune Johnson, and as a member of the steering committee for One Day in May, who at the request of the president have slaved for almost a month trying to put across a program that we hope will not end on May 15th, 1968. I'm not going to stand back and let these people say that we have to learn after we get out of Augsburg. Because we're not going to pay $1,200 a year to hear the stuff that that's not relevant to us as human beings. Because you go to college to further your knowledge, not to be whitewashed. Now, President Anderson will sit in his office and tell me he believes in black power, and then he'll come out here and say that we don't know what to do, we can't decide now, and we don't want to move too fast, and be peaceful, and all this kind of stuff. Now, we've got to have at least some positive approaches to the problem. Curriculum can't change overnight. I think everybody is realistic enough to know. But if the Board of Education, which has control over more people, can say that by September we will have books by black people, black Americans in the English classes as required reading, that Malcolm X will have, with parental permission, the students will have a day off for him, and to recognize the contributions of all minority groups for all the schools in Minneapolis, and Augsburg's the only four-year liberal arts college in Minneapolis with 50% of its teachers graduating, supposed to be going out to educate, and they're not aware of this, you can't be doing the function that you're supposed to. And another thing, Mr. Fagerlie is working on the FAME program. Now, this is supposed to get minority students into college, give them an opportunity to be exposed and to go through 4 years of college and also a summer transition program. The black students at Augsburg will not support this program if some changes aren't made in the system here at Augsburg.
Some very specific proposals have been made. I wonder if there are any responses to the FAME program and why this isn't supported, what needs to be changed. And what about cap and gown? Here's a girl over here. Question has to do with our responsibility for deprived students who can't meet our admission standards. What?
Don't call them deprived students. I think we have to recognize
I agree with that. I think I made the statement there that this was one of the deprivations that we were suffering here. I appreciate very much the comments that Lejeune made, and I think that these comments that have been made by some of the faculty members ought to be interpreted in terms of the fact that things will be changed when we get back to school in the fall in terms of these sociology courses, these history courses, these education courses. These things are going to be done. And I certainly didn't want to give the impression that nothing would happen. I simply wasn't going to be so presumptuous as to stand here and tell you all the things that I thought ought to happen because I think you ought to tell us what ought to happen. And that's exactly what's taking place in this kind of dialogue. And that's why I think it's important. Now let's get down to this question here. I think that the college transition program that we're trying to institute this summer will make it possible for us to say to any student, black student or otherwise, who has not been able to fulfill the normal admission requirements, look, you take this program and we believe that it is of sufficient depth and integrity that it will make it possible for you to get into Augsburg College. Then there are students who do not have high school diplomas, and we have said these people can enroll at Augsburg College. We've made specific arrangements for that kind of student who wants to pick up his education, who has been deprived for some reason or other of his high school diploma. These things are happening. They're happening in the admission requirements. They're happening in the various tracks that are set up that people can utilize so that we can give more people an opportunity to get an education at Augsburg College. Now, I know it isn't enough yet, but it's a start.
Kim?
I'd like to suggest that tomorrow morning you call a meeting in your office of people, students, who are ready for change, and who know, because we know we've got this all around back here, what kind of change that we want to happen. Call a meeting on 10 students. I suggest that June be the head of this committee. I suggest she pick the people because she's ready and she knows who else is ready. Call it tomorrow. Let's get going now and get it together before next fall. Get it so get the action the first day we get back this fall, even this spring. Because we're going to have 20 minority students coming here next fall. We better have it together before they get there. We might have it.
Kim has proposed that President Anderson call a committee of 10 students with Lejeune as the chairman.
I'll be happy to receive such a committee in my office, and if you want me to set the time right now, I will. I realize that there's always problems of scheduling, but if you want to make it 9 or 9:30, let me know, and we'll be there to talk it over. I'd certainly welcome this kind of response. Glad to.
Can the religion requirements be somewhat altered so that they will speak more relevantly to the issues today?
I'm sure that within the context of the religion department requirements that can be done. And I'm sure that it can be done in the Introduction to Theology course, which is offered first year to all students.
In terms of just one specific suggestion, it seems to me that rather than letting the head of our education department spend a sabbatical running to Sweden and to France, we should send him to the inner city schools so they can learn where it's at.
Proposal for a change in sabbatical has been made. The change will be, instead of Sweden, the inner city.
That isn't taking
Somebody else had his hand up over here. What proposals specifically do the members of the panel have? I think I should remind you that some proposals have already been made. President Anderson has talked about one already. Do any of the members of the panel want to respond in terms of specific proposals? Changes in courses have been talked about. We've talked about them for a long time. What else specifically is proposed?
Well, as I took it, this was the purpose of this meeting, was not to superimpose upon this group the changes that a few people thought ought to be made, but that this was the place for some dialogue to take place so that we could understand each other and in that way arrive at some solutions. Now, we've had some splendid suggestions in the area of curriculum. We have talked about change in the mix of the student body. We've talked about changes in the admissions requirements and the various tracks that the college sets up. These are specific things that we think ought to be done. Now, I think that the meeting tomorrow will bring out some further suggestions, and again, we're open.
Sure.
What about hiring some legal practitioners? And I realize that, yes, we have time, but I think the people that we have heard today, I think any of them would be very adequate and being a very fine addition to this faculty. And rather than just having sessions, maybe once a week at Condo or even not even that often, if we had someone around all the time, at least the influence would be around us so that we just close our eyes to everything that's happening.
What about Negro faculty members? And I'd suspect you'd want to add to that resource persons as we had here today.
There is a tendency and a possibility of being carried away in an event like this. Remember, what you have heard is highly biased in one direction. We are not all wrong in what is going on here at the moment. And any deficiency that you have is partly your own. For you have eyes. You can read the paper, you can see what is going on. You need not necessarily sit in a course and have it taught to you. As a matter of fact, your college education is primarily to get you ready to think and look for yourself. And that is not limited to your classes. Relative to a colored person, African-American on the faculty, our chemistry department 2 years ago made a bona fide offer to a highly qualified person, a Negro. New PhD, we were turned down. He could make more money in industry. He had a golden opportunity to come, but he did not take it. I'm sorry, I don't see you. Who spoke over here?
We're getting your bias.
Yeah, we always get your bias. Why can't we have some Negro bias?
Your prejudice in this matter.
Well, may I have the honor of carrying on for a moment here, please?
They're out there. You just don't want the students to make it look good. I don't think that you necessarily approach getting as teacher because there's plenty of black colleges that have teachers ready. You got to pay for something you want. It just shows the black college.
May I have the floor for a moment? I still have it, please. Let us remember now, when you are talking about bringing any person into Augsburg or any other college, you have certain requirements. You have had to meet them. Now then, let us grant that the Afro-Americans have had many disadvantages in their homes, in the areas in which they live. Let us not minimize that. But by the same token, how are they going to come and do college work when they would not do it in high school?
Oh, come on. Don't. Come on.
At least we're getting a little activity here. Let us not rush on. Let us not rush on from the viewpoint. We're going to change things radically because we've heard today. We're going to change things. I trust that we shall. I wonder who told you that. May I? I'll yield the floor to those of you who know so much more.
We'd like to ask President Anderson, was there a memo sent out to make sure that the classes wouldn't be held, and wasn't you in a faculty meeting who handed this to the whole class? present on this day?
A faculty meeting is a closed event. It is not to be published. Now, whoever told you that I did anything at a faculty meeting spoke where he did not belong.
But whether he spoke, whether he was supposed to or not, the truth is true.
I'd just like to say that the memo which was sent out was in order to clarify the understanding of the administration and the faculty as to the character of this day. And I hope that... No, I had no overtures from Dr. Augerty with respect to keeping laboratories open. None whatsoever. Now, the dean may, I don't know, because the dean isn't here to answer for that. I'd like to say this, that I wish we could have more Afro-American professors. And I know that these people are in very, very short supply. Now, if we could get, we have candidates applying from many quarters, and I'm sure that this is one area in which we would like to make some significant advances. And I think one of the professors that's made a great contribution here at Augsburg is Mrs. Howard. I think this has been a start, and we'd like to move further. Now, I would like to venture one suggestion, and that is that we consider using some of these people who have made such splendid presentations today as adjunct professors at Augsburg College, so that we could call on them. See, this is one of the wonderful things about being in this community. We've got these people who are willing, and believe me, they were very willing to come today, and I'm amazed at their response, the willingness to be here. And I think they would be willing to also help us in our courses as adjunct members of our faculty. I really believe that that's a real possibility.
I believe Ken Bailey has been asked to respond.
I would like to clarify one matter, if I may, please. It is perfectly true that there were some faculty who were concerned about the fact that on the 8th of May and the 15th of May and the 30th and 31st of May, all in the same month, that class periods and laboratories would be missed, which would mean to them that substantial parts of the material of the courses being taught would be missed by the students. Now, there was no organized group in the faculty meeting which requested permission to hold laboratories on this day or on registration day. There were a few individuals who asked permission to leave laboratories open on a voluntary basis on one or the other of these days. And in virtually every instance, the decision by the faculty and myself was to leave laboratories open on registration day in preference to this day, the one day in May. I will have you understand that the faculty as a whole was thoroughly in favor of holding this day, and you should not cast aspersions against people who were as thoroughly in favor of this occasion as anyone that I know.
We're going to have to close very quickly, but I think there should be time for one more question.
I agree with the concept of confrontation, but I guess I retain a lot of sensitivity for personal interests, and I think that any charge of bigotry should be made on an individual basis where confrontation can be effective, and not in a group situation in which you're alienating people. But I'd like to say also that I think that the discussion should continue, and if it goes all night, fine. I've got one specific suggestion. I have a personal interest in Community Relations Center, since it falls under student government. We attempted to set it up this year, but it has to be recognized that the work of a student part-time can't possibly affect any kind of change or cause any kind of participation in community events. we've had a community research center for 2 years now. I'd say it's the time we got a community participation center.
Amen.
I would like to add one last comment, if I may, please. I think there has been some serious misunderstanding of things that have been said by the members of the panel tonight, particularly the comments made by Dr. Quanbeck. Let me be as clear as I know how to be. You may be sure that the college will do everything it possibly can to be sure that as an institution we do not perpetuate racism. But let me say this one other thing, that regardless of what the institution may do, the final key to the problem is you and me. We are the ones who will determine the impact that any program the college can devise will have upon us as citizens. And it is perfectly true that you come to the colleges as the kind of people you are, you leave the institution as the kind of people that you are. And that is where the proof of the pudding lies. The kind of people you are when you come, while you're here, and when you leave. And this is all that Dr. Quanbeck was saying, is that the college can do what it can, but in spite of that, it is just as possible for a person to go through a course in black history and be totally unaffected by it as it is possible for a person to sit through a year's course in religion and be totally unaffected by it. Now, your willingness to be affected by the things that happen, like a day like today, is your responsibility and not the institution's. We do have a responsibility, yes, but so do you, and so do I as an individual. And as individuals, it is up to us to see to it that we live up to the opportunity that we have now.
I think that on that very fine note, we can conclude. Why don't we let those who want to leave and spend a few minutes yet together? Nobody wants to leave.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Moderator, can we also put it this way, that let those who must leave, leave? I have to be one of those.
Let those who must leave, leave. And some must, of course, obviously. Indeed.
I'd like to suggest that at noon we did, there was this worship. Well, I don't know where you were, but, well, that's, you know, that what we did was pray. But you see, here we are in this predicament, and you know, religionists, people interested in religion and theology and interested in being Christian like I, we said, you know, we've said far too often, that if you've, if you've got that peace, real down in your heart, why then that's all right. And you see, what we should like to insist is a correspondence between the affirmation and the action. And I guess that I should not like to imply by my earlier comments that that society is, atomized and individualized. I should like to agree with those who say that we have systematized, established prejudice. I'm certain that that's the case. And in order to disengage that prejudice, we have to deal with the system and with the establishment. But nobody, or I should say not nobody, but we will not be engaged to participate in that disengagement if we do not will it, you see. And so I would guess that in the first place, the group did gather for worship. We did gather for prayer. And in the second place, there is this social and individual relationship between which there must be correspondence.
I don't think personally that Augsburg College has been a Christian college until May 15th, 1968. I think that until this day, Augsburg has been an old-fashioned Norwegian college.
Thank you. Augsburg until this day has not been a Christian college, was the comment.
I think we've been praying ever since our country was founded, and what good has it done us now? Look at the mess we're in right now. We've got to do something more concrete than just pray all the time.
Well, since Augsburg is affiliated with our American Lutheran Church, what is our American Lutheran Church going to do? Obviously, our graduates have some great influence on the American Lutheran Church. And I came to Augsburg because I learned in my church, and I've changed. I have my conclusions. And I go back and I do a brick wall. What is going to be done?
What will Augsburg graduates do for the church? He's suggesting a difference between the institutionalized church and the kind of thing that's taught at Augsburg.
No, I didn't say that. Not taught about it. I say we have received, I have received, for some of us, there's been a great experience. But yet when we go back to our home, it's the same old established.
What?
I think we want to change since we are members of the
What do you do with the church at large? What do you do with local congregations if your attitudes are different?
Well, I guess that's why we're in business, in order to get people infiltrated into these congregations so that there can be some change. And that's why we had the day, because I think this is a basic expression of our Christian concern. And it was a great risk, because a lot of people are offended by this kind of thing, but so be it. This has got to happen in order for us to really be consistent. Now, I think I ought to say, and I don't know much about it, but some very concrete steps are being taken in our own American Lutheran Church. And remember this, that only 56 or 3% of our student body come from that particular segment of Lutheranism, so I think we have to be very careful here. But the Project Summer Hope, which is now being instituted in the congregations of this particular group, is intended as a crash program to do exactly what we've done today. Now, whether this is carried out 100% in all congregations, I have no way of knowing because I'm not in those circles. But I can say that Project Summer Hope is intended to give the kind of exposure and to give the kind of unsettling that such a day ought to give an establishment that is all too complacent and which needs the kind of students that we believe Augsburg can produce and send back into all of the areas of the establishment and do the kind of job that ought to be done in this area.
The local congregation is not merely a brick wall, and to take no responsibility for it is cynical.
And for this issue,
She has made the suggestion that Augsburg students make some recommendations which can be sent to local congregations, some recommendations on the basis of the kind of experience we had here today as a response. This is a specific kind of suggestion. Anybody want to speak to it? Mrs. Cairns. Faculty exchange programs with southern universities and colleges has been suggested. Do we have faculty interchange at Augsburg? Not at this point. It's a very good suggestion. Freshman religion ought to deal with one's own personal affirmations and attitudes.
Why don't you respond?
Well, I think that all of us in freshman English, I don't know what happens at St. Olaf, or religion. I teach English too. So. I think that most of us do expect a student to learn how to think theologically. And to learn how to think theologically means that you have to read some of the theologians. You have to know what, well, Bishop Pike, it's old hat. But you have to know what Tillich thinks, and you have to know what Bonhoeffer says, and what others have contributed. And I really don't think that one can really come to a definitive conclusion about what I think, or what I would like to think now, or how I would like to restructure my theology until I have examined some of these theologians. It seems to me that that's a prerequisite. However,
We talk about what you do, and we don't talk about that.
what we do,
What we do.
well, I think, well, I haven't quite finished with what I started. Okay. In most or many of the freshman religion courses, each student is expected to write a concluding statement on what conclusions he has reached. Now, we try to think we don't stack your conclusions for you. Perhaps we do. We're not completely objective. Nevertheless, your conclusions ought to be your own. And what conclusions you reach theologically are intimately related to the kinds of things that you do. Well, what about what you do? Well, in many of our courses, we provide textbooks which are specifically concerned with some of the relevant concerns in society. I should think that Secular City is about what I ought to be doing and what you ought to be doing. It seems to me that we do this. I hope we accomplish this objective. Education ought not to be merely courses, but involvement. If we're going to talk about the inner city and its problems, we ought to be involved in the structures of the inner city. Anybody want to respond? Phil? Sorry.
The teaching of religion, or the teaching of any course in which values come to some sort of expression, is not, I think, a simple job. And the teaching of religion courses in a society which has becoming more and more pluralistic doesn't make it more easy. I think that there is a sense in which in our courses, for example, take the Introduction to Theology, we seek to address some of the problems which actually exist. For example, in reading Harvey Cox's book, The Secular City, he really talks about some of the problems. Now, there isn't just one problem, there are really many problems, and I think that that the course seeks to introduce some of those problems. Some years ago, in an honors section in a course called Basic Bible, we used to read, as a matter of course, in connection with the prophets, Lillian Smith's Killers of the Dream, which was an attempt to introduce the particular problem in relation to an understanding of religion. But I think that it's not an uncomplicated problem.
I don't believe you've asked a question yet. Mm-hmm. We really ought to try to get faculty members, Afro-American faculty members. We ought to make a real attempt to this, as you suggested.
I suppose that there isn't a self-respecting university or college in the country that isn't looking for qualified Negro faculty members. Now, I think that's true. And I suppose that the number of available competent faculty members, Negro and white, is not unlimited.
Yes, right here, this fellow.
It seems to me that we've been kind of putting a symbolism of our institution up on the panel here, shooting them down like it's our own guilt, but it seems to me the whole tendency is to shoot down them, but we're just as much a part of it as anybody else.
Thank you. Should we agree on two more questions? Who will make it three? Over here. I'll recognize the fellow here.
Sitting Campbell, other students at Augsburg and everything, unless we do something concrete, we're just going to let it slide, because one day it may well be a thing.
We have committed ourselves to something very concrete here this evening, I think. I really believe we have. She affirmed the excellence of the experience today. One more question. Right back there. I didn't hear all the question. It had to do with why this hasn't taken place before. All right. It's been suggested that it's been suggested we try this again.
Betty back there.
Betty? Thank you, Betty. Thank you for your splendid response this evening.